They laughed when the disheveled man in the wrinkled suit stumbled into the back of the church 20 minutes after the wedding ceremony had begun. Would you have defended him or pretended not to notice? Tell us in the comments below. The father stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes desperately scanning the rows of guests, all dressed in their finest attire. Not a single seat had been saved for him. Not a single person acknowledged his presence. But no one in that elegant cathedral was prepared for what would happen when the priest suddenly looked up from his prayer book and made eye contact with the uninvited guest. The whispers began immediately. "Is that Sarah's father? What is he doing here? Didn't she specifically say he wasn't welcome?" The mother of the bride, resplendent in her designer dress and fresh updo, turned around with horror etched across her face. She quickly motioned to the ushers stationed near the back, who began moving toward the unwanted visitor. The father clutched a small, worn gift box in his trembling hands, his shoulders hunched forward as if expecting a physical blow. In that moment, he looked utterly out of place amid the flowers, the finery, and the celebration of his only daughter's wedding day. And if stories of parents who refuse to give up on their children despite overwhelming rejection move you, subscribe now. More powerful stories that will touch your heart every week, because sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with an unwavering love that refuses to surrender. The father, his name was Robert Mitchell, had not spoken to his daughter Sarah in 7 years, not since the divorce that had torn their family apart. He hadn't received an invitation to the wedding. He had only learned about it through a sympathetic cousin who couldn't bear the thought of him missing such a significant moment in his daughter's life. Now, as he stood there, the weight of those lost years pressed down on him like a physical burden. The church was magnificent, exactly the kind of place Sarah had dreamed about as a little girl. Robert remembered how she used to sketch wedding dresses in her notebook, how she would talk about the perfect ceremony while he drove her to soccer practice. "Daddy," she had once said, "when I get married, I want you to walk me down the aisle in a church just like the one in that movie we watched." Robert had smiled and promised her that day would come. But promises get broken and dreams change. Families shatter. As a construction worker with calloused hands and a high school education, Robert had always felt inadequate next to his college-educated wife, Elizabeth. When her career in corporate law took off, the gap between them widened. The arguments began, at first about small things, bills, schedules, parenting styles, and then about larger issues. Elizabeth's colleagues became her new circle, people with vacation homes and private school connections. Robert worked longer hours, trying to contribute more, to be worthy of the life they were building. But the distance only grew. The breaking point came during Sarah's 16th birthday party. Elizabeth had planned an elaborate gathering at their home, inviting her colleagues and their children. Robert had taken a double shift the day before to help pay for it all, and arrived late, exhausted, and still in his work clothes. He had meant to shower and change, but when he saw the spread of gourmet food and heard classical music playing in their backyard, something inside him crumbled. He felt like an intruder in his own home. When Elizabeth pulled him aside and hissed, "Couldn't you at least have cleaned up before showing up?" it confirmed everything he feared. He didn't belong in their world anymore. 2 months later, Elizabeth asked for a divorce. Sarah, caught between her parents, eventually sided with her mother. How could she not? Her mother offered stability, connections, a path forward. Robert offered weekend visits in his small apartment and his limited understanding of the world she wanted to be part of. The custody arrangement gave Elizabeth primary custody, with Robert seeing Sarah every other weekend. But even those visits dwindled as Sarah's schedule filled with activities and social engagements that seemed calculated to fall on his weekends. The final rupture came during Sarah's college application process. Robert had saved every penny he could for her education, amassing nearly $30,000 over the years, not enough for the prestigious universities she was considering, but a contribution he was proud of. When he offered it to her, she had looked at him with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "Mom's firm has a college fund for partners' children," she told him. And besides, I'm applying for merit scholarships. I'll be fine, Dad. She hadn't even taken the check he'd written, the culmination of years of extra shifts and sacrifices. After that, the calls stopped coming. His text messages went unanswered. When he drove to Elizabeth's house, no one answered the door, though he could see movement behind the curtains. Eventually, he stopped trying. The pain was too much to bear. He threw himself into his work, took on renovation projects, anything to fill the emptiness. The only updates he received about his daughter's life came through mutual acquaintances or distant relatives who took pity on him. Now, as the ushers approached, Robert considered turning around and leaving. What right did he have to be here? What good could possibly come from this intrusion? But then the priest, a man with kind eyes and silver hair, paused in his reading. The entire congregation turned to see what had caught his attention. And in that moment of suspended time, Robert saw his daughter at the altar, radiant in her wedding gown, looking exactly as he had always imagined she would. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she recognized the figure standing at the back of the church. The groom, a tall man in an expensive tuxedo whom Robert had never met, leaned down to whisper something in her ear. Elizabeth rose halfway from her seat in the front row, her face a mask of fury. But before anyone could act, the priest raised his hand in a gentle gesture that somehow commanded the attention of everyone present. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church, "that we have another guest who has joined us." His eyes met Robert's with unexpected warmth. "Would you care to be seated, sir? Would you have accepted that unexpected invitation, knowing the bride herself hadn't wanted you there? Or would you have walked away to spare everyone the discomfort? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below." Robert stood frozen, unable to move forward or retreat. The small gift box in his hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. One of the ushers, a young man who seemed uncomfortable with his assigned task, approached and whispered, "Sir, perhaps it would be best if you let him stay." The voice came from the altar, clear and steady. It was not Sarah who had spoken, but her groom. This is a day of celebration and family, all family. Elizabeth rose fully now, her expression thunderous. "Matthew, you don't understand. Robert is not—" "He's Sarah's father," Matthew interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "And this is his daughter's wedding day." The church fell silent, 100 guests holding their collective breath. Robert could feel every eye on him, judging, wondering, waiting. The priest looked between the altar and the back of the church, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps," he suggested, "we should take a brief moment to allow the family to discuss this privately." What happened next stunned everyone present. Sarah, her wedding dress rustling softly against the carpet, stepped down from the altar and began walking down the aisle, not toward the entrance where her father stood, but to the side chapel door, indicating with a small gesture that her mother should follow. After a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth rose and joined her daughter. The priest nodded to Matthew, who also made his way to the side chapel. "Ladies and gentlemen," the priest addressed the congregation, "we will resume our ceremony shortly. Please enjoy the musical interlude our organist will provide." As if on cue, the church organ began to play a gentle melody. Robert remained standing in the back, uncertain what to do. Then, the young usher who had approached him earlier returned. "Sir, they've asked if you would join them." In the side chapel. The side chapel was small, with stained glass windows casting colored light across the stone floor. Sarah stood with her back to the door when Robert entered, her wedding dress seeming to glow in the filtered sunlight. Elizabeth was seated on a wooden bench against the wall, her expression unreadable. Matthew stood near Sarah, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Why are you here?" Sarah asked without turning around. Her voice was controlled, but Robert could hear the tremor beneath the surface. Robert's voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again. I heard about the wedding. I just wanted to see you, to give you this." He held out the small gift box, though no one moved to take it. 7 years, Sarah said, finally turning to face him. 7 years without a word, and you show up on my wedding day? Robert felt the accusation like a physical blow. Without a word? Sarah, I called, I texted, I came to the house. You shut me out. After you abandoned us, Elizabeth interjected, rising from the bench. I never abandoned anyone, Robert replied, his voice low. You divorced me. You took my daughter away. You weren't there when it mattered, Elizabeth shot back. You were always working, always absent. I was working to support our family. Robert felt years of suppressed anger rising within him. To pay for the house, the cars, the vacations, the lifestyle you wanted. Stop it, both of you! Sarah's voice cut through the tension. This is my wedding day. I will not have it ruined by the same arguments that destroyed our family. Matthew, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Sarah, I think we should hear him out. He came all this way. Sarah looked at her fiancé with surprise. You don't understand, Matt. He wasn't there. Not for graduation, not for college, not for anything important. Robert felt his heart breaking all over again. Sarah, I tried to be there for graduation. They wouldn't let me in without a ticket. I stood outside the auditorium, listening through the doors. I heard them call your name. I was so proud. His voice cracked. As for college, I drove up to visit you 3 times. Each time, you texted saying you were too busy, that we could meet next time. Sarah's expression wavered. What? Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. Sarah, let's not do this now. We have guests waiting. But Sarah wasn't listening to her mother anymore. She was looking at Robert with new uncertainty. You came to my graduation? And to campus? Robert nodded. I have the gas receipts, the hotel bills. I kept them all. I don't know why. Maybe as proof to myself that I tried. Matthew gently squeezed Sarah's shoulder. Remember what you told me about your 16th birthday? How your dad showed up late and your mom was upset? Sarah nodded slowly. Did you know, Matthew continued, that he had worked a double shift to help pay for that party? Sarah turned to look at her fiancé with confusion. How would you know that? Matthew looked slightly embarrassed. I may have done some research. After we got engaged, I wanted to understand why you never spoke about your father. I found his number and called him a few months ago. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah looked from Matthew to Robert, her eyes wide. You called my father without telling me? I did, Matthew admitted, and we met for coffee. Several times, actually. Elizabeth made a sound of disbelief. You went behind Sarah's back? Matthew met her gaze steadily. I went seeking the truth, and what I found was a man who never stopped loving his daughter, even when the world told him he wasn't good enough. Robert stood quietly, the gift box still in his hands. He hadn't expected Matthew's intervention. He had come today with the smallest hope of simply seeing his daughter get married, even if from the back of the church. Sarah turned to her father, really looking at him for the first time. She saw the gray in his hair that hadn't been there before, the lines around his eyes, the worn suit that had probably been purchased specifically for this day. What's in the box? She asked finally. Robert extended it toward her. Open it. With hesitant fingers, Sarah took the small box and lifted the lid. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny soccer ball. Her breath caught. You used to wear this to every game, Robert said softly. From when you were 10 until you were 15. You said it was your lucky charm. You took it off after that party, your 16th birthday. I found it in the bathroom and kept it safe, thinking you'd ask for it someday. Sarah lifted the bracelet with trembling fingers. I thought I'd lost it, she whispered. I looked everywhere. There's something else, Robert said, under the padding. Sarah removed the small cotton insert and found an envelope beneath it. Opening it, she pulled out a check, the same check Robert had tried to give her years ago for her college education, now updated with a current date. Along with it was a deed to a small piece of property. I couldn't contribute to your education the way I wanted to, but I've been saving all these years. The check is the same amount plus what I've managed to add, and the property, it's just a small piece of land by the lake where we used to go fishing. I thought maybe someday, if you and Matthew wanted, it might be a place for a vacation home, or to take your own children someday. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. You kept saving for me? All this time? Robert nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Elizabeth, who had been watching this exchange with a complicated expression, finally sighed. Sarah, there are things about the divorce that you don't know, things I never told you. Sarah turned to her mother, confusion evident on her face. Your father didn't abandon us, Elizabeth admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I pushed him away. I was climbing the corporate ladder, and I felt held back by his background, his job, his ordinariness. She couldn't meet Robert's eyes as she spoke. I was wrong, and I used my influence to turn you against him. The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Would you be able to forgive such a deception that cost you years with your father? Or would the pain of manipulation be too much to overcome? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sarah stood motionless, processing her mother's words. The bracelet dangled from her fingers, catching the colored light from the stained glass windows. Outside, in the main church, the organist continued to play, unaware of the drama unfolding in the side chapel. All those times I thought Dad didn't show up, Sarah said slowly, or didn't care enough to be there. He was there? Elizabeth nodded, her composure finally cracking. Not always, but more than I let you believe. She turned to Robert. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. Robert had imagined confronting Elizabeth 1,000 times over the years, had rehearsed angry speeches and accusations, but standing here now, seeing her vulnerability, he felt the anger drain away, replaced by a profound sadness for what they had all lost. 7 years, Sarah repeated, but this time her voice held wonder rather than accusation. 7 years, we can never get back. Matthew stepped forward. But today is a new beginning, for all of us. He looked at Robert. Sir, I'd be honored if you would join us for the ceremony, not just as a guest, but in your rightful place. Elizabeth looked up sharply. Matthew, what are you suggesting? Matthew smiled at his future mother-in-law. I'm suggesting that Sarah deserves to have both her parents walk her down the aisle, if that's what she wants. All eyes turned to Sarah, who was looking down at the bracelet in her hand. The tiny soccer ball charm caught the light, a reminder of simpler times, of a childhood before adult complications had fractured her family. Slowly, she slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, where it settled as if it had never been gone. Dad? She said, the word feeling strange and familiar all at once on her tongue. Would you walk me down the aisle with Mom? Robert couldn't speak. He simply nodded, tears flowing freely now down his weathered cheeks. The priest, who had been waiting discreetly by the door, stepped forward. Shall we resume the ceremony then? The congregation murmured in surprise as the side door opened and the wedding party emerged. First came Matthew, resuming his place at the altar with a smile that seemed brighter than before. Then Elizabeth, who took her position not in the front row, but at the entrance to the aisle. And finally, Sarah appeared in the doorway of the side chapel, her arm now linked with her father's. The priest raised his hands, quieting the whispers. Dearly beloved, he began again, we are gathered here today to witness not just the union of two hearts, but the healing of a family. He nodded to the organist, who began the traditional wedding march. Robert felt Sarah's hand tighten on his arm as they prepared to walk. Elizabeth stepped to Sarah's other side, linking arms with her daughter. Together, the three of them began the slow procession down the aisle. I never thought I'd get to do this, Robert whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Sarah looked at him, really seeing her father for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. No more apologies, he replied gently. Only new beginnings. As they approached the altar, the guests, who had been bewildered by the unexpected pause and even more unexpected addition to the ceremony, began to understand what was happening. A few were wiping away tears. Others were smiling. Even those who had been closest to Elizabeth and most influenced by her version of events couldn't help but be moved by the tableau before them. When they reached the altar, Robert placed Sarah's hand in Matthew's, then stepped back. But Sarah held on to him for a moment longer. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. Robert smiled through his tears. Never. Not for a single day. The ceremony proceeded, more meaningful now for the reconciliation it had witnessed. When the priest pronounced Sarah and Matthew husband and wife, the cheers seemed louder, the joy more profound. And when the newlyweds recessed down the aisle, they paused where Robert and Elizabeth sat, no longer separated by rows of guests and years of bitterness, but side by side, united in their love for their daughter. At the reception, Robert found himself welcomed into conversations, included in toasts, part of the celebration in a way he could never have imagined when he had made the decision to come to the church that morning. The gift box that had seemed so inadequate now sat among the other presents, the deed and check safely tucked away for the future. As the evening progressed, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. Robert, who had been chatting with some of Matthew's relatives, froze. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it. But then Sarah was standing before him, hand extended. "Dad," she said simply, "it's our dance." The floor cleared as Robert took his daughter's hand and led her to the center. The opening notes of "What a Wonderful World" filled the room, the same song he used to play for her when she was small. As they began to sway to the music, Robert found himself transported back in time, to living room dance sessions with a little girl standing on his feet, to backyard barbecues where he would twirl his daughter until she was dizzy with laughter. "I chose this song months ago," Sarah admitted quietly as they danced. "I told myself it was because it's a classic, but I think, deep down, I was still holding on to those memories." "I never let them go," Robert replied. "They were all I had." As the song ended, Robert prepared to step away, but Sarah held onto his hands. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice barely audible above the applause. "Something only Matthew knows so far." She leaned close to whisper in his ear. "You're going to be a grandfather in about 7 months." Robert stepped back, his eyes wide with wonder. "Really?" Sarah nodded, her smile radiant. "Really? And this little one is going to need their grandfather to teach them how to fish at that lake property." The DJ was calling for other couples to join the floor now, and Matthew appeared at Sarah's side, extending his hand to his new father-in-law. "May I have this dance with my wife?" he asked with a smile. Robert stepped back, his heart fuller than it had been in years. "She's all yours," he said, then added, "Well, partly yours. She'll always be my little girl, too." As he watched the newlyweds dance, Robert felt a presence beside him. Elizabeth stood there, her earlier hostility replaced by something more complicated. Regret, perhaps, or nostalgia. "We did something right, didn't we?" she said, nodding toward their daughter. "Despite everything." Robert considered this. "She's the best of both of us," he agreed, "and none of our mistakes." They stood in companionable silence, watching their daughter's happiness. Robert thought about the years lost, but also about the years ahead. Birthdays, holidays, the birth of a grandchild, a future he had stopped allowing himself to imagine. The reception continued late into the night. When it was time for Sarah and Matthew to leave for their honeymoon, they found themselves surrounded by well-wishers, throwing rose petals and cheering. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah broke away and ran back to where her father stood. "Promise you'll be here when we get back," she said, hugging him fiercely. "Promise you won't disappear again." Robert held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, committing this moment to memory. "I promise," he said, "wild horses couldn't drag me away." As the newlyweds drove off, their car festooned with streamers and just married signs, Robert remained standing at the entrance to the venue, waving until they were out of sight. The other guests began to disperse, heading to their cars or back inside for one last drink. Elizabeth approached him again, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" she asked, surprising both of them with the offer. Robert shook his head. "I have my truck, but thank you." She nodded, then hesitated. "Robert, I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry. For all of it." He looked at this woman who had once been the center of his world, the mother of his child, his greatest love and deepest heartbreak. "It changes today," he said simply, "and that's a start." As he walked to his truck later, the parking lot nearly empty, Robert felt lighter than he had in years. The night air was cool against his face, and above him, stars punctured the darkness of the sky. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the pain, the loneliness, the perseverance. He thought about the simple courage it had taken to show up today, uninvited and unwelcome, not knowing what reception awaited him. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to simply show up, even when every door seems closed to us. Sometimes, love means standing in the doorway of a church, heart in hand, ready for rejection but hoping for reconciliation. And sometimes, just sometimes, life gives us second chances we never dreamed possible. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more powerful stories every week that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of forgiveness. And click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so powerful you'll never forget what it means to truly fight for the ones you love, even when they've forgotten how to love you back.